And we have a very special session, as I introduced you earlier. Very, very, very fortunate to have three very distinguished guests here to share their experiences with you and from their various personal perspectives. And the format will be, we will start with an introduction from each of the panelists, about 15 minutes each, and then without a break, so free flow for the next hour and an hour to an hour and 15 minutes with your questions and your engagement, all right? First of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Near to my right, Prajan Vandit Piku, who's originally from England. Now he is a monk at Wat Pak Nam. I read online that he actually has quite an online presence and mentioned several times by both CNN and BBC, etc., as the blogging monk. I've seen that several mentions. His interests actually is listed as nuclear power, wind turbines, electric universe theory, psychology, fairy tales, and other mystic religious traditions. So this will be very interesting talk today. Next to Ajahn Pandit is Mr. David Lyman, who is a legend in the legal profession, in not just in our country, but in the region. Right? He is the chairman and the chief values officer of Tilake and Gibbons, the largest independent law firm in the region. Amongst various other positions that he's held, a very senior position in the American Chamber of Commerce and also key positions at the World Economic Forum, etc. And next to David, last but certainly not least, we welcome Kunying Chada Watanachari Tham, who was the former president and CEO of Siam Commercial Bank, Thailand's most profitable bank in the last few years. And oldest, yes, 107-year-old Thai bank, first Thai bank, in fact. She is now the independent director of Siam Commercial Bank, as well as a member of the CSR committee and the corporate governance committee. She is also a vice president of the Anti-Corruption Organization of Thailand, which is an initiative of the private sector against corruption. So with that very short introduction, we'd like you guys to quickly give an introduction of yourselves so the panelists know who they're addressing. So if you can just quickly, your name, your very short background, please.
So I'm Matthew.
Use a mic if you can.
Matthew from Germany. I study business and marketing at the European Business School and doing an exchange semester here at Sasin.
Hi, I am Christian from Peru. I am MBA student in Manchester Business School in UK and now exchange student in Thailand.
I'm Stavros, also from Germany, studied in the States as well, and here for an exchange semester.
I'm Sebastian, also from Germany, Leipzig Graduate School of Business, and have some work experience also in China and Indonesia. So I had my experiences with corruption and those topics.
My name is Anne, a second-year student. I have an architecture background from the States.
Hi, my name is Nat, and I'm a second year's MBA at Sasin.
From where?
Thailand.
Hi, my name is Apisada. I'm second-year student at Sasin. My background is on marketing at Thammasat University.
Hello, my name is Kim. I'm from Korea. I'm exchange student.
Hi, I'm Sunet and I'm from Thailand and I studied in England for 14 years.
Hi, I'm Patsargon Jiratiwat from Thailand. Graduated from Boston. Second year here at Sasin.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm from Thailand too. My background's in economics and my career has been in advertising.
Hi, I'm Puk. I'm from Thailand as well. My background is in marketing from the University of Melbourne.
Hi, I'm S. From Thailand. I have background in interior design.
Hello, my name is Judipan. My background is in computer science from the States.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a second year Sasin student. Have some background in marketing.
Hi, I'm Eva. I'm from France and doing my last year in exchange student in Sasin.
Hi, I'm Delphine. I'm also French and I'm studying in the north of France in a business school called EDEC.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm also on an exchange. I'm from the University of North Carolina, Keenan Flagler Business School, and most of my background is in finance, accounting, and human resources.
Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm from North Carolina as well, but I went to Appalachian State University, and I studied sustainability. And
You don't have a southern accent.
I can hide it, I guess.
Hi, I'm Dominic, and I'm exchange student from Germany.
Yeah, I'm from the same school in Germany, also an exchange program here, and I study finance in Germany.
Hi, I'm Marine, exchange student from France.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm an exchange student from France from the same school and doing business.
Hi, my name is Harbins. I'm from Costa Rica. I'm an exchange student. My school is in France. I'm a full-time MBA participant. And I have to say I'm not part of this class, but I was told this was open to public and I thought it was going to be very interesting. So I decided to join.
Hi, my name is Rangsidet from Thailand. Second year MBA. Studied major in communications from London.
We skipped a few.
Hi, my name is Belle. I am Mr. Lyman's assistant. I'm here to keep his presentation in 15 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Priya. I'm the Sustainability Manager of the Sasin Center for Sustainability Management.
Good afternoon. My name is Masu. I'm a research analyst at the Center for Sustainability Management.
Okay, so we all know each other now, and we can get going with the first introduction by let's start with ladies first with Kun Ying Chada, please.
First of all, thank you, Dick. Frankly, the entire room here, I only know two people. Well, maybe three, sorry. First of all, David I have known for, 30, 40 years in different guises, because he used to have a different hairdo, a different facial features and all this. And so it's been like that because he's been, I think maybe you were born here in Thailand? No. But anyway, his family firm had been in Thailand for at least 100 years?
No, since 1949.
Okay, 1949, okay. And Nick, we sat together for about 3 or 4 years maybe, trying to judge which of the NGOs should receive, outstanding awards for a few years anyway. So these are, and of course, Mr. Paufler, who has distinguished himself in the selling of German cars, and maybe that's why there are a lot of German students here today. And otherwise, likes to play is it piano? Something, you used to play some music. Was it piano or something? In another setting where I definitely heard him perform. And he has had a long, distinguished career in the business of automotive in Thailand, and is now, I think now, you're making a career for yourself in academia, right? Mm-hmm. Good. Well done. And that's it. So. Let me start by saying that unlike David, I didn't bring any slides, I didn't bring any assistants, and I maybe did not, give enough justice to your time by not really being totally prepared for this session, because there are a whole host of other things that I am trying to do or to participate or to suggest. Be that as it may, when I was told to to join this session. At that point in time, I thought I was also, not so busy, but anyway. But I thought that certainly the setting of this very international background of students is very valuable for me to also receive some feedback from what young people these days are thinking about and talking about as well, especially on these topics of, you can start from corporate governance to sustainability to anti-corruption, all these things. So when the topic of business ethics was mentioned, I had to start by trying to think, what you really wanted me to talk about. And I thought that maybe, usually bankers are generalists. They have to cover a whole host of topics and things. So in the same manner, the topic of business ethics, I thought that probably the emphasis should be on the ethics, and the secondary emphasis is on the business part, meaning that how do ethics evolve and are treated in the environment of business. Because generally ethics, to me, is really the ability to know right from wrong, black and white. But these days, one talk about different shades of gray. And when do you make your judgment as to, whether those different shades of gray should be black mostly or white mostly? And, how do you treat, something that you find is in that category? And that, I think, is the real life situation for many of us, whether it's in private life or in corporate organizational life, that, maybe there's something beyond just what you see in black and white terms, but this could be gray at the background. So basically, ethics to me is basically common understanding and concepts as to what is right and what is wrong. But there could also be maybe, somewhere in the middle that one has to try to come out one way or the other, which side you should be on, and how to do it. Then I would relate it to the business side of things, which, as everybody in this room, I think, would agree, business is business. It means that you are trying to, conduct a certain activity to be able to create value that would come back to you in commercial terms, whether in terms of profit, in terms of return to shareholders, whether in terms of sustainability or sustainable survival and being able to be continued. We talked about the bank that I'm associated with having been around for 107 years, but during the 107 years we've probably had at least 3 or 4 different crises that we had to overcome, and luckily we were able to overcome them. And therefore sustainability is a challenge, and how to be able to meet the challenge. So in short, I try to see what I could perhaps share with you under the different topics as what business should look at or should see in order to be able to make the right decisions, in order to create value and to be able to survive, let's say, with strength and with lots of future ahead of the business. And I think that in the end, especially looking at the challenges that occurred back in 1997 when we had our economic crisis that, at least in my own living memory, and I'm pretty old now, it was the most severe shock that we've ever had. Post-war anyway. I was born just after the Second World War. And I think that at that point in time there were certain things that became very apparent, that we somehow had escaped two very major sets of principles that I think at that point in time were only just beginning to be talked about, but as of today has taken, let's say, fairly deep roots in our business environment. And the two, maybe, this is where I should ask, your opinion. What do you think are the two, sets of business principles and philosophy that you think had occurred since 1997? Would anybody like to suggest anything from the class? I'd like to be a little bit interactive about it, otherwise you get very sleepy after lunch. Would somebody from the second row like to venture something? What do you think, at least in the Thai context, or maybe even international context, had been most talked about in the past 15 years or so, that would govern business? Come on, Nick, how come your students are so heavy, so quiet? Somebody should, yes please.
Accountability.
Okay, accountability is one, yes. Anything else?
Like not over expanding like business. I think what the problem is in 1997 was that people over invested like too much. Like for example, in the real estate market, the people invested too much, so that's what created the bubble.
Right. Okay, I think you are both right, of course, but you are only partially right, because you are talking about different elements of what, for me anyway, were the big changes in the business practices. The first one, I think, is the concept of risk management being followed in a very formal and systematic fashion. The concept of corporate risk management. And I think that risk management has not only extended to, well, certainly the financial sectors. We, at the bank that I work with, we have something like 700, 800 people on the risk management side, because, there are credit risk, there is the market risk, there is, what else is there? Operational risk, and subsets of those, and then go to reputational risk and all this. So risk management is a very prominent part in the life of a business these days that we never paid attention to in a systematic manner. The second part, I think, is this concept of corporate governance. And corporate governance, as I think you would all agree with me, has to do with the way that you conduct yourself as an organization, as a business partner, as part of being a part of society. So to me, post-economic crisis of 1997 brought these two, let's say, practices of looking at risk management as as something that you do on a daily basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis, always trying to define what are the risks your organization is facing, and within that, because we're on the topic of ethics, the reputational risk part is a very important part of the business risk management. And on the corporate governance side, there are, again, this is also something that here in Thailand had been very prominent the past maybe 12 years, because it was actually at the suggestion, I would say, of, I can't remember, there was IMF or the World Bank when they came in to help with the recovery of the economy. It was suggested that part of the reasons why we all went wrong, you were right at the back when said we overexpanded. Why? Because we did not have those two things. We did not have sufficient risk management, and we did not have sufficient corporate governance. And the corporate governance part was something that we could perhaps learn from the West. And they have something that had been more or less codified as practiced by various institutes of directors. And therefore, there was, at the behest of, I can't remember, IMF, the World Bank, plus the Bank of Thailand, plus the SET and SEC here, the Thai Institute of Directors was formed in order to systematically study, propagate what the principles of good corporate governance should be. This has been now about 12 years, I think, since the inception. And while the corporate governance codes have been, that there are various courses on the what good corporate governance is expected to be. It had been modified over the years, but even so, it is, I would say, mandatory for all directors that are now sitting on the boards of listed companies that are traded, companies that are traded on the Thai Stock Exchange, to undergo the courses at the IOD. And what do the courses cover? The major principles of corporate governance. They have great thick books. I think you've taught there, right? At the Institute of Directors. Have you taught at the Institute of Directors? IOD. But anyway, they have great, huge books, that are things that you have to follow and to study, case studies and so on. And they have big books and they have small pamphlets. They have something that, for example, this is called Director Fiduciary Duty Checklist. So they even have sort of handbooks that you can carry around to see what your duties as a director should be. And it talks about, your duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, and duty of transparency or disclosure, something of the sort. But then, of course, these are only just major headings. But basically, what it tells you would be how to do things. What the Thai IOD did was to actually provide a guideline that originally had about 147 different questions, I would say, to ask each of the directors or organization to assess themselves against the yardstick of 148, I think it was 148 different questions about, whether you are treating your shareholders correctly, fair treatment to shareholders, whether they are minor or major shareholders, for example, disclosure of information should be equally given to either minority shareholders or a major shareholder, for example. And so there are these different codes that they have written down, 148 of them. And then a couple of years back, because of our, entry into the ASEAN economic community, so the different IODs, so the different ASEAN countries embarked upon an effort to also have an ASEAN set of rules for CG, for corporate governance. And so after the different IODs of the different countries sat down together, they came up with an agreed set of, you wait for it, 237 questions, to be answered and assessed whether either you as a director or your organization as a business place adhere to these corporate governance principles, or the ones that are deemed to be the best practice for the businesses. Of course, these sets of rules will be changed over time. For example, there are things like, do you have a large enough proportion of independent directors sitting on your board? For example, the minimum is 1/3 of the directors ought to be independent. But if you want to really get a good mark, it has to be over 50%. So this is the way that you mark the questionnaire and so on. So what I'm trying to say really is that I think as far as businesses and business ethics are concerned, I think that what had transpired over the past maybe decade had been the development of these two tools for helping us to be able to behave in a manner and in the standards that would be internationally accepted, that would give you comfort and would give you peace of mind if you were to follow these different codes of conduct that are being that have been spelled out to guide you, both in terms of the risk management and in terms of corporate governance. At the risk of overrunning my time, I think I will just give this overall picture first, so that hopefully I've been generous enough so that not to beg, borrow, or steal from our other speakers. Is that all right?
Thank you
I
very
can
much.
answer any question on any of these things.
Yes.
Then,
Thank you very much for that that quick introduction. So the focus is on the really something that's risen from the ashes of the financial crisis, the Asian financial crisis. The concept of a formal and systematic risk management and a comprehensive set of very much rules-driven corporate governance to try to keep businesses to behave and in line. Whether they do or not, we can explore that a little bit later. So now let's move on to David.
Good afternoon. Let me stay in character. I'm a lawyer. Have been for, since 1965. So the context of which I will be presenting today will be in that context. I won't change my rules. So let's start off with the first. I see the Americans are smiling. And, all right. Arguing with a lawyer is a lot like wrestling in the mud with a pig. After a couple of hours, you realize the pig likes it. And in that context, before I get to my experience with the IOD, let me preface it with an idea here that way back when I was a child, on the first day of school, I was a first grader, and I handed my teacher a note from my mother. And the note read as follows: "The opinions expressed by this child are not necessarily those of his parents." And both of my parents were lawyers. And in that context, I also went through the Thai IOD course, way back when. And they invited me back to give a lecture on being, from the legal standpoint of being a director. The title of my context was, "Do you really want to be a director of a Thai company?" And the reason I asked that is because there are 100 laws in this country imposing criminal liability, vicarious criminal liability, on directors of companies for something that somebody within the company does, even though the director had no knowledge of it and didn't participate. They were not particularly pleased with my presentation, and they never invited me back. All right, let's move on. In terms of ethics in business. Well, you're all studying, Masters of Business Administration. Well, management, in the context of Mr. Peter Drucker, is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Now, I was a naval ROTC midshipman, and one of the first courses they taught us is that leaders are made and not born. So you all have the potential for being leaders. And some of you will have characteristics of leaders, and others will have to be beaten into you, particularly if you've ever had any military experience, and you learn. And the definitions of leadership are many, and we'll go over some. But one of the principles of leadership And you can have good leaders and bad leaders and ethical leaders and unethical leaders. Well, let's just talk about the ethics part of it, which is what we're here to discuss. So ethics must begin at the top of an organization. That is with the leaders, with the chairman, with the presidents, and so on. And then it filters down. It's a leadership issue, and the chief executive must set the example. And I'll get to that in a minute when we go over what's on this card, and each of you has one. Divorced from ethics, leadership is reduced to management, and politics to mere techniques. So management is not necessarily leadership. Managers can be leaders, and leaders can be managers. The key is leaders are leaders. Whether you're in a management position, whether you're in a subordinate position, whatever, you're leaders. Now let's take a look at just what my own law firm does. And our mission is, we established this some years ago, to be a leading regional full-service law firm practicing international business, serving international business and civil society. Our mission is to provide reliable, integrity-driven, knowledge-based, and innovative delivery of personalized and practical legal solutions to those we serve. The measure of our mission lies in its execution. This has to do with leadership. This is something that I created about 20 years ago, and we still follow it today. All right, I can go over the creed of the law firm. You can read it for yourself, but I think we can move on. Key here is for leaders. Leaders don't create followers. You work with followers, but you create other leaders. Again, that's something I learned when I was in the Navy. We're dealing with ethics. Let's define what we're talking about. Ethical standards. There is a definition which I happen to like. It goes as follows. Principles that, when followed, promote values such as trust, good behavior, fairness, and/or kindness. This is ethical standards now I'm talking about. There's not one consistent set of standards that all companies follow, but each company has the right to develop the standards that are meaningful for their organization. Ethical standards are not always easily enforced, as they frequently vaguely define and somewhat open to interpretation. As an example, men and women should be treated equally. You have to define what all that means. Or treat customers with kindness and respect. Again, a generalization. Others can be more specific, such as do not share the customer's private information with anyone outside the company or the organization. But we've talked about ethical standards, now let's talk about values, because those two words are going to come up, or three words are going to come up again. What are values in ethical context? Important and lasting beliefs or ideals shared by members of a culture about what is good or bad and desirable or undesirable. Values have a major influence on a person's behavior and attitude and serve as broad guidelines in all situations. Some common business values are fairness, innovation, community involvement. The Thai IOD puts out a monthly publication, or is it a quarterly publication? Monthly. And the bi-monthly. September-October edition says this, by the author, who is a member of the board there. I believe people's ethical standards relate directly to the way they have been treated in an organization. If a company does not encourage an ethical climate or address signs of impropriety, we cannot expect much from the employee in terms of always behaving in a good way. It's up to the leader to create the proper standards. Okay. Now let me go on. Chief Values Officer. This is my job description. You all have a copy of it. You put it under your pillow at night, okay? And you have to look at both sides, by the way. The concept is not mine. The definition is. The concept was developed by a managing director of the World Economic Forum, and it came out of the corporate scandals, particularly in the United States and then in England and in the Netherlands and so on, in which it was discovered that the leaders of these various organizations did not have any ethical standards that they adhered to or promoted within their organizations. And corporate governance just kind of blew up because it really didn't exist in those days. So he came up with the concept that if each organization had a chief values officer, whoever that is, then these difficulties would not have occurred if that chief values officer insisted and monitored what was happening within their own organizations. All right, so I came up with this definition. Let me read it to you, because I think it is important for you, as it is for me. It reads as follows. In this age of amazing technological achievements, broadband information overload, anxiety, turmoil, extremes, and diversions, and hope, a chief values officer, or CVO, of an organization is the guardian of that organization's values and virtues. Okay, I've defined values. Its culture, its spirit, its integrity, a word you'll hear fairly often, its ethical principles and moral foundations, and promotes adherence thereto. A CVO keeps the engine of an organization's life running smoothly, with minimal disruption to the environment and a maximum of character building and social responsibilities. A CVO nurtures relationships and preserves the vital interests of all shareholders of the organization within its immediate sphere of influence. A CVO is charged to keep the human side of an organization functioning on the course of honest, wise, responsible, legal, and accountable business and professional practices, and in compliance with the community standards and the organization's or accepted sectorial codes of conduct. That's what a CVO leader does. All of you have that potential. All right. What are the characteristics of a leader? Lee Iacocca, who was one of the America's famous leaders, and a man who, like me, brooks little impropriety. He was the head of Chrysler organization, and he took Chrysler from the bottom of the basement and made it into a very, very well-known and very successful company. And then when he left, of course, it's gone back down again. But Lee Iacocca wrote a book called Where Have the Leaders Gone? And his characteristics of leader are as follows. Curiosity, creative, communicate, character, courage, conviction, charisma, competent, and common sense. All this makes sense to you?
There's one thing missing. C for cigar. I think this is not really collide anymore. The cigar.
I have a joke about cigars, but I'm not going to say that one here. My father did found the Bangkok Cigar Company, cigar group, by the way. I used to smoke cigars until I was 4 years old. And then I used to hide behind a big overstuffed chair. And for some reason, my parents could always find me. You know, the smoke was curling up. And they finally got me off of cigars when they told me, and I was 4 years old, said, David, if you don't stop smoking cigars, you're not going to grow. So that's my excuse for being short. Anyway, let's go on. Leadership. Just recently, as a matter of fact, yesterday, Grant Thornton, who is a well-known Big 5, Big 7 accounting firm.
Like Hayes study.
Hayes, that's also here, but that's one separate. Grant Thornton. Yes, it's the top 7. They came out with Thailand, the Business Growth Environment, International Business Report 2014, which they presented yesterday, as a matter of fact. And in it, they have a section called Leadership, in which they say the role of leaders in creating successful businesses and driving growth is critical. How these leaders run their teams and make decisions can be the difference between success and failure. And it goes on. Integrity emerges as the key ingredient to good leadership, according to the Thai business leaders. 98% select this trait as important. Behind me on the screen, you'll see the traits that business leaders in Thailand found important, as opposed to business leaders throughout ASEAN. And you'll see for the Thai, well, you can compare the two. Okay. Integrity, positive attitude, creativity, passion, ability to inspire, confidence, ability to delegate, communication, intuition, modesty, sense of humor. I like the sense of humor. In terms of growing leadership capabilities, Thai business owners are most likely to do personal leadership skill assessments, followed by mentoring from more experienced executives and setting challenging goals and monitoring progress. Personal leadership skills assessments are used by 79% of all Southeast Asian businesses. Fewer than 1 in 5 Thai business leaders have ever used a business coach in their role as a leader. There you go. You've got some potential candidates for this MBA program.
All right.
Compared to 44% across Southeast Asia and 35% globally. So Thailand was 18%. Okay. It also does women in business. What else do they have here? Do take a look at this report. It's on the website of Grant Thornton, Thailand. And I don't have that here with me. Anyway, if you're interested, contact me. Let me know. The Hay Group also did a study on the best companies for leadership in 2014. And they found conditions quite similar to what the others did. And they found that the best companies for leadership take a more proactive, structured approach to developing their people. And in terms of the top global companies, I'm not quite sure how global it is, but for leadership, the #1 company for leadership development and leadership training is Procter & Gamble. And then it goes down, General Electric, Coca-Cola, IBM, Unilever, Intel, sounds very American, McDonald's, Samsung, 3M, Hewlett-Packard, and so on it goes. These are very good companies in terms of leadership, and you can probably see it in terms of their success. The best companies for leadership, according to the Hay Group, take a determined and disciplined approach to help leaders develop and rise within their own organizations. All right, we've talked about all the good things about leadership. Let's talk about some of the challenges of leadership. Now, what follows is a commercial done by EDS, Electronic Data Systems. It goes back about 10, 15 years. I used it in a presentation on managing lawyers. But I think this applies not just to managing lawyers, it's just managing people in general. This is management and the need for a good leader to handle that management role.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
No. You haven't got it. Can you hear? No, they can't hear it.
You test it and it works, and
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Hold them together 10 bells.
The best plans of the best leaders sometimes run afoul of technology.
It's just ripped to shreds, you know? You see the movies, you hear the stories. It's living a dream. It's not everything else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
What happened there, folks? Well, let's move on.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
we can come back later. Apologies.
We'll come back later. Again, the challenges to leadership. Dear mother-in-law, don't teach me how to handle my children. I'm living with one of yours and he needs a lot of improvement. Another challenge to leadership. An airline introduced a special package for businessmen. Buy your ticket and get your wife's ticket for free. After a great success, the company made follow-up phone calls to the wives asking how they enjoyed the trip. All of them gave the same reply. What trip? Oh boy. It's a hard audience. You get them to laugh. Okay. All right. Time. Oh, all right. Well, I've got one more for you. The stress points. This has to do with leadership. It also has to do with whatever you do in your life, particularly if you're working for an organization, whatever that organization is. And I learned this from a professor from INSEAD back about 25 years ago. And he gave a presentation to a corporation that had a worldwide meeting of its managers and directors. And there were about 250 people in the room. You could have heard a pin drop in his presentation. And he came up with a quandary that all people working in a business, be they leaders, be they followers, and what else have the same stresses, if you will. You have three roles in your lives. One, as an employee or an employer, as the case may be. Two, as a spouse, assuming you get married. Three, as a parent, assuming you have children. His conclusion was you can be good at two of the three, but it'd be very, very difficult to be successful at all three. I told you could hear a pin drop in his presentation. That evening, 6 of the 250 people in that room resigned because they decided the pressures of business on them were not enough for them to give up their roles as a spouse, as a parent, and in society. So think about it. We all face these same challenges and these same stresses. You face them, perhaps not now, you will in the future. Trust me. There is no right answer. Each answer is up to you as an individual. Okay. I've run out of time.
We can come back and have more during the Q&A session. But David gave us several definitions of leadership and ethics and the 9 C's of leadership, etc. And ended with don't work, or don't get married, or don't have children. And now we move on to Prajjan Pandit.
But there's one alternative to that. One alternative to that. Is it working? There's one alternative to that, and I decided for that. You're absolutely right. You have to make compromises. And I said to myself in 2005, when I was in Athens, with 60 I will retire. Even I can work till 65, so I'm not anymore. I didn't have it so precisely presented to me, but I think you can postpone things to a certain degree, and then you have to cut losses. I think that was my approach.
Please.
Okay, so I noticed that as we've been going along, the computers have been coming out and the phones have been coming out. So this will be a short and sharp presentation of what little is left of equal time. So if you can remember, turn off your computers and your phones and pay attention. Following on from the previous note, I don't work, I'm not married, and I don't have children. This is why I have a totally stress-free life, you see. So any of you who is really interested in a stress-free life, you're welcome to come and ordain as a monk with me in the temple. The idea of bringing me along today was that if we talk about ethics, we should have somebody representing religion. But I want to oppose that viewpoint a little bit partly because religion doesn't have a terribly good record with morality and ethics. Let's talk about good qualities, spiritual qualities, rather than talking about religion, because there will be people in here from different religions. Let me ask you, what is a good quality? Give me an example. Okay, let's start a different way. Give me an example of a bad quality, something that's nasty. Aggressive, dishonest, mean. Okay, why are you quicker to think of the negative qualities than the positive qualities? Give me some positive qualities. What are positive qualities? Honesty. Hardworking. Tolerance. Good one. Kindness. Fairness. Kindness. Okay. So pretty much wherever I go, these kind of qualities are the same. And I was doing a seminar kind of thing in Singapore with some business leaders. This is the Young Presidents Organization, if you know YPO. And all of these guys are under 40. They've all got multi-million-dollar companies. They all employ more than 200 members of staff. And they said to me, okay, we want to do a session on meditation, but we're very busy. We've got money. We want the best teacher to give us the best presentation in the shortest amount of time to give us the most effect. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And so I went into this crowd, and this is not Buddhists. These are, international business people from the Asian chapter of YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And so they come from all kinds of different religious backgrounds. Most of them are not really interested in religion. And so we did this same thing, calling out what are good qualities. And again, people have difficulty thinking up the good qualities. Bad qualities are easier to think of, partly because you spend a lot of your time blaming people for being bad, looking at the bad qualities in other people. But very few of you spend the time looking for the good qualities in other people. So I'd like to, separate this idea of morality and ethics, separate from religion. Let's say religion doesn't have a brilliant record when it comes to being moral. You only have to look in the newspapers. Recently there was a nun in Thailand who was driving a Porsche 911, this kind of thing. So, but something we can agree on with all people is there are certain good qualities. Now my next question to you is, if you agree on those certain qualities, and there are qualities that are debatable. Desire, is that good or bad? We could talk about that if you like. If you all agree on these good qualities, what are you doing to develop those good qualities? You have come to university to develop your business skills, and yet you've just said to me that good qualities, all these good qualities that you mentioned have nothing to do with business, really. Yeah? You can incorporate them into business, but they're not connected with business. These honesty, kindness, integrity, these are not really business skills, are they? These are good qualities. But you come to university and will spend a lot of time and a lot of money to develop your business skills and your accountancy and your law and all the rest of it, no offense. But how much time and effort do you actually put into developing a good quality? If you agree that kindness is good, what have you done to develop this quality of kindness? So there was a story within Buddhism of King Pasenadi, and he was a king of the Buddhist time, and he came to consult with the Buddha, and the Buddha said to him, "What have you been doing today?" And he said, "I've been doing what any good king does." And the Buddha said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I've been enjoying all the spoils of my kingdom. I've been enjoying ruling over vast numbers of people, and I've been enjoying endless sense pleasures because I can have anything I want." And the Buddha said to him, so imagine if somebody came to you and said, Lord, King, there is a mountain on its way to your kingdom, and it's crushing everything in its way, flattening everything, and it's going to flatten your kingdom. He said, then what would you do? How would you be spending your day? He said, well, then I would spend my day practicing Dharma, which means meditation or practicing good qualities. So the story went on a little bit, but then the king got the idea that actually just enjoying my power or enjoying my sense pleasures, that is the short view, very short-term view. The long-term view is very different. And when you start to pick up the long-term view, you change your activities. One of the things that I learned being a monk, because I'm English, I'm a little anti-authority. And, I mess around a little bit. I'm always like the naughty one in the temple, the one that's getting up to something that's wrong. And it took me quite a while before I realized that I actually have an effect on other people. Now, this might be something to do with your upbringing. My upbringing, my family, they kind of ignored me, so I never realized that I had an effect on the people around me. And it wasn't until much later I realized that Thai people have such large expectations of the monks. They expect us to behave in a certain way. And if I break that, whether I agree or not is different. And I can tell you some stories about that. But if I break that, then I have quite a large effect on the other people. If I trot out the kind of things that Thais like to hear monks say, then they kind of like that. And at first I felt, well, I don't want to just say what people want to hear. But I started to realize that actually I have a much bigger effect on people. My ripples that come out of the way that I've lived my life are much bigger than I thought they would be. All of you will be affecting people, and presumably you're training as business leaders. You're going to have some kind of business. And I'm presuming that you've studied all the different kinds of business leaders, transactional, transitional, servant leaderships, humility leaderships, relationship leadership styles. I presume that you've studied all of these, right? Right? You know all of this. So I wanted to just make this point that whatever kind of leadership style you have, as somebody who owns a business or runs a business or is high up in an organization, you have quite a large effect on other people. Now, we can't make you into moral leaders. It's not your job to take on board the morality of your staff or your workers or anything like that. But what you do as a leader will affect those people. The kind of things that you do will be having an effect on the people around you. So take responsibility. One of the ways that you can take responsibility is by understanding that what you say makes a difference. And this is very interesting, I found. My background is in psychology, and some research a few years ago was done into cheating. And basically they were encouraging American students to cheat. I'm glad they didn't do this in Thailand. By giving out a questionnaire of which they knew that the average of correct answers was about 6 out of 10. Then they've used different methods to incite people to cheat. For example, you could mark your own paper, and then you go up to the front and you say what your score was. And then people were fairly honest. They marked their paper. I got 6 or 7 out of 10, and they marked it correctly. Another round, they got them to mark their own paper, screw their own paper up and throw it in a bin, and then report their score. And suddenly the scores go up a bit. This went on for quite a while. For example, they tried many hundreds of variations. For example, do you think that the men cheated more or the women cheated more? Or you don't want to answer? It turned out that the men cheated slightly more than the women. Does that surprise you? But when they said to the men, that the women scored more than men, the men didn't cheat very much. But when they told the women that the men scored more than women, suddenly the women became the biggest cheaters of the whole experiment. So it's interesting. But what I wanted, the important thing of this research that I want to bring up is they had the students before the test write down how many of the 10 commandments they could remember. Now, these were not Christian students particularly. You know, they weren't, you know, in a Christian college. And then they just put that paper to the side. Then they did the test and they reported the score. And you know what? Nearly everybody reported an honest score, despite all the inducements that the experimenters gave to cheat. What this means is, and remember, they had no... It's okay. I'm waiting for your signal. Okay. What this means is just talking about something encourages that behavior in other people. So as a society, we should start to talk about good qualities. And it's something that's not usually mentioned. People are so focused on rewards, so focused on success or your ideas of success. Like King Pasenadi in the story, his idea of a success was, yeah, I'm ruling this great kingdom and I've got total control over it and I'm enjoying all the sense pleasures from it. Taking a slightly longer term view, and what happens is your priorities reorganize. And then you start to think, well, what was the influence that I've had on other people? You won't be able to make people honest. You won't be able to make people kind, but you can talk about it, and talking about it will encourage that behavior in others. I want to finish off. There's a story of a lady called Tatiana, and she's Russian. I'm just recovering from the flu, so forgive me for coughing. And I told a story, and I'll tell you what the story was afterwards if you want, but I told a story. And it's like a little quiz, a little test, and you have to get the answer. And just as I finished telling this little story, she came out with the answer like that. And I said, wow, I've never known anybody actually get the answer to that story, let alone get the answer that quickly. And all her friends turned around and said, wow, that's so good, Tatiana, you're the best, you know, you're so smart, you got the answer. Was it a good thing to get the answer to the story? Unfortunately for her, that story was a test that psychologists use to see if you're a psychopath. Psychopaths and sociopaths have the same mental qualities, A psychopath will be criminal, and a sociopath is not criminal. So the sociopath is a bit smarter, but both are very smart kinds of people. The primary qualities that they have is high reward seeking, and you can measure this in their neurology, in their brain, which you might be able to mention later. You can see this in the brain. The reward circuits are highly developed, but almost no fear of risk. They have very low heart rates. So, a good example living in Thailand is Thaksin. I don't want to mention whether he was good or bad, moral or immoral, but he was the kind of person that really seeks for a high reward but has very little risk, has, very little fear of failure. He was over 40 before he had his first successful business. The opposite of that is someone who has very low reward seeking but has a very high conscience. So that's what I want to leave you with today, is to consider this. What is your basis for success? Is your basis for success the rewards that you can get? Or are you able to put things down and not look for your own reward, not look for your own gain, but to operate with a conscience? I'm okay, the water won't help. So, I'll finish off with a true story. There was two Thais who went to heaven, And the first Thai gets to heaven, gets to the pearly gates. St. Peter is there, or King Yama, as he's called in Buddhism. And he says, "Oh, my name is Deng, and I'm a Bangkok taxi driver." And King Yama says, "Oh, you go straight to the top of heaven. Off you go." Says, "Oh, great." The next one comes up, and he says, "Oh, my name is Prat Basert, and I've spent my life as a Buddhist monk." And King Yama says, "Well, we'll let you into heaven, but you're going down to the bottom." And the monk says, "Wait a minute, that's not fair. And, you know, I've worked for good all my life." And King Yama says to him, "Look, we don't care what you did. We care what your influence was on other people. We care what your effect was on other people." He said, "Now, you gave these Dharma sermons all your life, and the effect was you just put everybody to sleep." But the Bangkok taxi driver, he drove people around Bangkok, and the effect was he made everyone start praying. So okay, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tam Pandit. It spoke of the, made us think of the good qualities, which is actually surprisingly, you know, never really thought about it that way. But it's so easy to come out with the bad ones. So, you know, good qualities will also rub off on others. Reframing is something we talked about in class, in fact. Looking more at the long-term view, long-term. What is your long-term purpose, long-term reward? What is it that you're looking for in life in the long term as opposed to just the short term? Very much about the, you know, what will be your effect on others, your influence on others. Because in a position of leadership, you have such a huge effect on others. For me, that is a responsibility. So with that introduction, let's open up to your questions, and far away, just stick up your hand and speak into the mic.
May I just say one thing, because you said a comma, and I will just bring it to the end. David talked about challenges, and it's quite important to have a personal mission statement which is long term, but unfortunately I was measured on a monthly basis, and people 1 week before already called from Germany, "Are you making your target?" Not only volume-wise, also result-wise. Very, very pushy. So you have the eternity for your vision, and then you have the monthly targets. And the worst thing is, and that was really a challenge here in this country, that you have to deal with corruption on a daily basis when you sell. Yeah? I'll give you one story. It was a government authority, I don't tell you which one, but they were ordering, or they asked for a bid of 1 or 2 armored vehicles, and the price would be, when you buy it correctly, 10 million baht. Yeah? And we gave a very fine, fair price, and then we found out that the authority went to Germany. Armored vehicles are very specially prepared, especially they are very heavy, and so everything has to be done very safely. So they went to a so-called bodybuilder, and the price was there 12 million baht, and we were quite happy. And I was then frustrated to my bones when I heard the 12 million made the deal. So why 12 million? Somebody got it was basically an excess invoicing, not under invoicing, what you do when you want to do tax fraud, and somebody got the 2 million, which is exactly what corruption is. So for the taxpayer, it was 2 million more than we would have charged, very frustrating because we have integrity code and all the things I told you, and the implementation of that thing is very frustrating, and probably it was for you a bit boring to listen, but that's reality. And when you are a sales guy, you are fired up and you want to make good sales, and you have the targets which put pressure. So that's the other side of the coin. You have to go for good values, but on the other side you are, of course, ambitious, want to show what you have learned, you want to achieve your targets. That just coming to your challenges. I could only bear the system here because I did my PhD in tax fraud with the German FBI and the tax prosecution. So it was not only masochism that I survived the 5 years here, it was the biggest case I've ever seen. So that was interesting then. But I have to say it was like a millstone around your neck when you have to then compete in this kind of environment.
Leading on from that, perhaps Kuning Chada can add, because this clearly, has such a huge effect on the business community. And what is the business community doing to address these corruption issues that is so rife especially in Thai, in the Thai business environment?
Obviously, it's a huge challenge, and it's something that's so, unfortunately, and really, I would say shamefully, has to be admitted that it pervades, all levels. We talked about cheating the schools. Yes, that's why we had to have different campaigns for. In Thai, it's called "Dek Thai To Pai Mai Kong," which means that Thai children growing up not being cheaters. And then you have another level saying that university graduates, that's another campaign, saying university graduates will not cheat. So it starts from the very bottom. Your parents or some parents get their children into what they seem to feel to be the better schools via some sort of payoff. And then it pervades the whole system. Then you buy your positions, especially in supposedly lucrative positions, like the police was supposed to be policing you and policing all the wrongdoings. But then we say that there are 2 or 3, hopefully, movements that would be at least helping to alleviate, if not eventually eradicate, such practices. In the officialdom, they have had several campaigns trying to instill different codes of behavior for civil servants, but obviously it's not working at all. So a couple of years back, the private sector took this initiative as a major weakness in our systems, and like-minded businesses got together to say that we will try to address the issue by at least starting among ourselves certain codes of conduct. And so right now there are, among the private sector, there are 2 different streams of effort. One is under this organization called ACT Act, Anti-Corruption Organization of Thailand, and totally private sector led. And because we know we are private sector, what we have decided that we would focus on 3 different things, 3 major different areas. One is to instill, ปลูกฝัง the word in Thailand is ปลูกฝัง, which is to instill the ethical behavior and culture and standards, from the very beginning, whether you are, in schools or among the young, or whether you are in a particular organization, company, whatever. So this ปลูกฝัง is something to instill this culture and understanding as to, why corruption is bad, why you should not do so, etc., etc. Then the second area would be whatever you do, try to get a system of Thai word is ป้องกัน which is preventive, to prevent. Now, to prevent what you do, first of all, you must not be a party to it. You must not be a party to the corruption, because they say that it takes, two hands to clap, right? And therefore, the idea there is to have a certain sets of behavior, and that is being done. There are a whole lot of things being done under this particular category of prevention. For example, starting with, say, government procurement, there are things that the Transparency International, I think you've all probably heard about TI. Transparency International has a code of practices, and we have adopted the code and has become something called Integrity Pact, IP. Now, I'm told that these sort of integrity pacts are actually practiced in Germany, because certain German institutions have been adopting these integrity pacts type of arrangement, whereby under certain procurement, public procurement, the vendor has to sign an agreement whereby he would not engage, the organization would not engage in any malpractices, and would also cause their own partners. For example, if you're a contractor and you go and employ a certain number of subcontractors to do the other parts of the contract, the whole way you have to agree to be totally clean and free of bribing and so on. So that's the Integrity Pact part of the practices that we're trying to instill in the government system. And this has already been at least accepted by the current government for certain procurement items. Another practice is something called cost, which is something from Britain. It's for construction contracts, whereby again certain agreements would be made between the organization that wins the contract to behave in certain manners concerning the different parts of that contract. For example, to accept third-party surveyors and advisors, and certain transparent practices you have to disclose, certain things under the agreement, under this thing called cost. Again, this has also been accepted. There would only be certain pilot projects that at least this government has agreed to take up in order to test out, to hopefully show that it can be done, so that hopefully it would also take roots for the future. Now, the ones that I talked about are specific examples of what we under ACT have been trying to implement and had been trying to persuade. But there are 8 different other areas whereby we have proposed that certain laws are changed, so that, for example, corruption cases cannot have an end date, so that once you are nabbed for a corruptive act, then whether it's been 10 years or not, and whether you have disappeared to some other country or not, you're still liable to become hauled up to the courts. There would be no maturity date for cases like this. So there are certain things, that there are 8 different areas where we have presented what we think need to be done in order to have these preventive measures being applied and being carried out, at least among the government sectors. Again, on the supplier side, meaning on the private sector behavior side, the previous examples was, really forcing the government agencies to adopt better practices. But on the practices on the side of the private sector, this is under, I'm sorry, it's IOD again. I happen to know a lot about IOD because I used to have to also head it for a while. And under the IOD, we have formed something called the CAC, which is the Collective Action Coalition Against Corruption. And members of CAC, who are all companies and organizations, will first of all voluntarily declare that they would undertake policies to be adopting, non-corrupt practices. So it's a declaration of showing that your organization is going to adopt, totally all the anti-corruption measures and efforts that are being spelled out. But that declaration is not enough. The second step of the whole movement is to also be certified that not only have you pronounced that you are going to be corruption-free from your end, from the private sector end, that you will not go and bribe any government officer or pay for that license or pay for this and pay for that in order to get your, to be ahead of your competitor. But the second part is to be certified to be doing so. And the certification would involve an adoption of a whole set of rules, also to be certified that you actually carry on the practice as you sign on. And for example, we are relying either the external auditors, more work for the auditors, or your external or your audit committee, or totally outside examiners to come in and certify that what you have signed on to do, you really do it in practice. So these are sort of 2 running streams of undertakings that at least the organizations that currently I'm associated with, adopting is only a beginning, and there's so much more to do. But we hope that just the very fact to have public awareness, hopefully to get public enthusiasm and public following to adopt these practices would be a good start. And we hope that this, good start would take root and then therefore, multiply. So I'm just, explaining what we have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Students?
Actually, I think we know that David Lyman has been part of the many anti-corruption organizations as well, so maybe we would like to hear some of your opinion on this topic. What do you think, how do you think, is it possible that the corruption would get better in Thailand?
It's going to take a minimum of 1 generation, and probably 2, for it to improve significantly. That has to do with the historical approach to corruption, which it's accepted as part of Thai culture and part of Thai life. That doesn't mean it's good. It just means that's the reality of it today. We've talked in the past about government officials being corrupt, and as Kunjata has pointed out, there's no such thing as the sound of one hand clapping. It takes two, or it takes two to tango. And the private sector has been kind of ignored until just recently. But without the private sector to pay the corruption, and that's, when I say the private sector, I'm talking about civil society as well. And the poor farmer, the man on the street, whoever has to pay to get a government official to do something, that's included. Because without educating civil society, without educating the private sector, without educating the students, without educating the teachers, corruption will continue to exist. If you forgive me, just as sin continues to exist.
I forgive you.
Thank you. Will we be able to eliminate corruption in its entirety? No. Will we be able to control it and keep it within limits? Yes. When I first came here many, many years ago, the level of corruption in government procurement was somewhere between 5 and 10% of the total value of the package. Okay, 5% you can live with. In recent days, it's gotten up to 45 and 50% of the total package. That's intolerable. Intolerable. Let me give you an example. All of you have come into the airport, or left the airport, and you've used the push carts. How much do you think those push carts cost? Come on. Anybody? I'm not expecting you to be correct, okay? I'll tell you what the answer is, but what is your view as to what they should cost?
$400 a piece.
Okay, it's $400 a piece. How much? 1,000. Anybody else? $400 is about 12,000 baht. Come on. Anybody? For the Suvarnabhumi airport, they ordered 10,000 of these push carts, which lasted, by the way, no more than 3 years, because they were made by somebody who didn't have the vaguest idea what they were doing. The total cost was 50,000 baht a piece. 50,000 baht a piece. That was 500 million baht to make 50 of those things. Okay? I went to the internet and just, airline push carts or airport push carts, and you can buy them from China for about $110 a piece. All right. Okay. The current carts were provided now free to the airport by an advertising company, a French advertising company, just so they could put advertisements on it, and they provided them free. They offered to do the same thing when the airport was open, and the airport authority said no. So they spent 500 million baht for nothing. All right, that's one example. That's an extreme example. And there are other examples of corrupt activities on the part of the government, and that have gotten way out of hand. I mean, the Army bought a balloon, dirigible.
But David, I think we have to be fair. It's not like now all the Westerners here in this room get to heaven, and they go the other way. Just give you two examples. In today's Financial Times was written that Goldman Sachs and some other companies have been called to a hearing because obviously the risks in commodity trading is just flying through the roof at the moment. And then yesterday I read about a study which has been done in Zurich. So now we are talking in integrity land. There was a study by the University of Zurich, and the headline of this, and that was the study, was bankers have tendency to lie for financial gains, say scientists. And this was published in the very, very honorable journal, top journal, the Nature. No, this is top. If you get into Nature, you have made it. Watson Crick published their Nobel Prize winning piece in Nature. So this is a very well peer-reviewed magazine, and when and after all these cases of Enron and Rufesto and what came after that, and the subprime mortgage campaign, it still goes on. So you are right that it takes not only 2 generations probably in Thailand, it's even Switzerland. They came up with that result. It's very bad. And my biggest problem, talking about challenging here in Mercedes-Benz Thailand and in Mercedes-Benz Greece, both high-risk countries, due to the Transparency International Index, was the implementation. Signing something nice with IOD is easy, but then doing it, very difficult, very difficult.
That's correct. Just to add, I think really all these initiatives, what we're trying to drive are 2 things. One is tone at the top, the leadership issue that, who was it, you talked about leadership. Leadership is, the beginning of setting the right tone and the right behavior. The second one is to make sure that everybody's in the loop, in the same integrity loop. It's the transparency and disclosure of information. The more you force them to come out in terms of disclosure of information, that would actually help prevent a lot, almost all of it, I would say. So these are the sort of 2 major drives that I think we are trying to put in, in spite of all the procedures and whatnot. But in the end, it's getting the right leaders into the right places, and those leaders, would go and push the agenda. And secondly, to have a system whereby the transparency part can really occur. So that's what I'd just like to add, please.
Yeah.
What is the electric universe theory? It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to take that off my bio. It's kind of astronomy. It's a different view of astronomy. It's not kind of related to our topic today, so I don't want to go into it. I should probably rewrite my biography.
Please.
There's a couple of cases that we did in class of asking students, why would you pay bribe? And as leaders, most of us own business, family business, and most of the answers came down to because our competitor do it. And if we don't do it, we're going to be forced out of business. Do you have any advice or view as a leader when you come into that situation of what mindset you set if you are put into that position?
Who are you asking? I have one short answer to that, and that is back to this research onto cheating. And if you remember, they did a test, 10 questions, they knew the average score. Then one version of the test, what they did was, they told the students, for every correct answer, we'll give you $1. Now these are university students, but presumably they're not that desperate for a single dollar. And the idea was that people would start cheating when you start giving them money. And you know what happened when they said, we'll give you $1 for every correct answer? Cheating went down. Because people didn't want to associate themselves with somebody who would lie to get money. But when they said to the students, if you cheat, come and give us your results and we'll give you a ticket, then you take that ticket to somebody over there and they will give you $1 for every correct answer. Cheating went up. And what's happening here is, if you can't remove yourself 1 or 2 steps from actual money, you are far more likely to be corrupt and to cheat. So when it's something on paper, When it's some deal that's just a business, these are some numbers, we'll have 500 of these, and you're one step removed from actually taking cash, then you are more likely to cheat. This is why people cheat on taxes and things like that. So be careful that there are different ways to cheat, and the further you're removed from actually putting your hand on cash, the more you can justify it to yourself.
Maybe I can add a second example, which should visualize for you that integrity usually is a bitter pill. I don't think you get it sweet. I told you the excess pricing experience I had. We could have sold with 10 million. The one who sold it for 12 million made the deal. Then there was another example where, and that was going to a very high governmental office. I don't mention that. And it was the renewal of a fleet. So we were bidding for the top S-Class and a couple of E-Class. And now I'm coming to the implementation. There are so many rules and regulations in the meantime that in Stuttgart, at the head office of Mercedes-Benz, there was a compliance office. So when you had anywhere in the world a deal with the government, you had to send it to this compliance office with all the conditions of the deal, and then they would agree, they give green light or not green light. And the situation was the following. We were sitting, the general managers of sales were sitting with an envelope of it was a bidding, so everybody had basically the proposal in an envelope. And there was BMW in the room, us, so two. And our guy, they were sitting outside, and he was waiting for the green light from Stuttgart, which did not yet come. Yeah. So now he had, but in our company was a zero tolerance rule. I told you about that. So when you do something which is plus alpha, you are fired. Period. So he was, of course, keeping the envelope closed because he didn't get the green light, and the competitor already asked, so what's going on here? So no, we cannot open yet. Please imagine the general manager sales and operations sitting there and has to tell the competition he cannot open the envelope for the bidding process. Very embarrassing. So I was, of course, in the loop, and the bidding was over. The government institution then decided there has to be another competitor, and so Toyota came in, and finally we lost the thing. Now, we were absolutely in line with integrity, but we lost the business. Yeah? So that's unfortunately the message. There are certain things you cannot do when you have a system in place for integrity. You have to once in a while walk away from a deal, and on the other side you have monthly sales targets, and that hurts because the sales targets are also deciding your bonus and your promotion.
If I could add a little bit on this, one of our hopes is to get, I hope nobody is in the business of construction or being contractors, construction contractors. But as you know, here in Thailand, there are 3 or 4 major companies in the construction industry. And what we have been trying to do is to say that, you are just the 4 biggest construction companies in the land. Can you please come? And all we wanted to do is to have them join our, CAC. And none of them would. They just would not be persuaded. And the same answer as, the gentleman was asking about, each of them were concerned that the competitors would come in and take away their business if they were to discontinue whatever practice they are doing. And we say that, you are the biggest companies in the land, and you need, you can call the shots with the subcontractors. Why don't you do it? The four of them have a pact together with each other that, among the four of you, you would observe such and such a code. And I think, really, what boils down is that, first of all, they didn't trust each other, because trust is a very big element of all this, that you have to be able to trust each other if you were to go into a pact and believe that your partners or your, the people in your own field would go along with the same idea. And, each of them would say that they weren't maybe not quite so afraid of the other competitor within the same league, but they were afraid that the secondary leagues would come in and take away their business, and that was what they could not, be bold enough to accept. So, these are sort of real life problems that we face, but I think that, with the combination of law, vigilance, hopefully, the understanding that in the long run, we are all worse off, and possibly, to the brink of disaster if we do not get the system correct in this country. Hopefully that will be when we are able to have a better situation, better system, at least in our country.
Please.
What is your opinion on incentivizing people monetarily to not accept bribes, such as the case with the police, where they said if you reject the bribe, you'll get this and that amount of bribe? What is your opinion?
Difficult the reporting of a good deed. That somebody, the policeman then has to report, I have not accepted this bribe, right? So at the practical side, I think it's difficult.
Perhaps we can hear from our panelists. Maybe Prajan Bandit can give his views.
It seems to me counterproductive to try and give somebody money not to take money. So, I notice things like the immigration department, they send all of their officers to our temple for training in meditation, and we come, and this is one of the things that, is a little hidden in Thailand, but a lot of people come to the temple and they do meditation, and we talk about, keeping the precepts, the morality, and etc., and I think that's worthwhile. So those kind of programs, I think, are good, because we talk about it. The more you talk about it, the more people will start to follow it. When it's hidden, or it's underground, or it's just accepted, see, people who do bad things, they don't like to talk about it. But the opposite is also true. The people who will talk about it stop liking to do bad things.
Another initiative that under the ACT actually, that I'd perhaps like to let you know, for the Thais is called Ma Phao Ban. It's the watchdog campaign. Under this watchdog campaign, we ask for volunteers to be trained. We can only train about between 40 to 50 dogs per class. And we train them on how to recognize and how to report a wrongdoing. And this would be in the website. And, what we teach them is how to do it legally, so that they would not be hauled up against sort of defamation suit or whatever that might occur. That actually, because these watchdogs can only, bark toothless a little bit, because the bites are not strong enough. But what we do is that those where we have agreed with the counter-corruption agency, the Pabashon, what we have agreed with the counter-corruption agency, under what sort of scenario or what circumstances would they go and would they take up the cases to be further looked at by the national agencies. And so far there had been quite a number of cases where we have identified that there was real truth in this. Now, what we need badly is, of course, to have more volunteers enlisted. Currently, we have a bit too few, to about 200 plus, all trained. And this coming year, we will have another probably 500 trained. And but each of them has to be properly trained, equipped, and so on. And they're all volunteers. Hopefully, with this, again, another campaign, this would help bring to justice and bring to the fore, because if you are exposed in the social media, a lot of them do feel uncomfortable. A lot of them do stop doing things that they used to do. Thank you.
David, perhaps you have do you have your some comments on the bribing, not to take bribe situation?
Obviously you have cultural issues, you have monetary, that is, compensation issues. There's a policeman paid enough to live a decent life? And the answer is no. Does this mean all policemen are corrupt? No, they're not. From the standpoint of a lawyer, Thailand does not lack for anti-corruption laws. Enforcement, of course, is one of the issues. The United States passed in 1977 called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, in which it was against American law to pay foreign government officials for business transactions. It took 20 years to get the OECD members, another 20 countries, 39 altogether, to come up with a similar convention called the Convention for the against the bribery of foreign government officials in international business transactions. It took Thailand about another 10 years to adopt that. No, they never did adopt that. Oh no, did they adopt that convention? The OECD convention? No, they have not yet adopted the OECD convention. Again, we're up against cultural issues. I am aware that there is not cooperation between the various countries to exchange information, even among member countries of these various conventions. I am aware that the Tourist Authority of Thailand, the head of the Tourist Authority of Thailand, I think some 10 years ago, was accused under the American Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of accepting bribes from an American couple to put on
the Bangkok Film Festival or something.
Yeah. Anyway, the Americans were prosecuted under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The Thai authorities have asked the Americans for evidence so that they can prosecute the head of the Thai Tourist Authority. The Americans refused to give them the evidence. They said under the American law, it's been sequestered, it's buried, and it cannot come up again. What's Thailand supposed to do in a situation like that? So the countries that are members of these various conventions won't cooperate with each other. That's another issue in corruption. I'm just trying to remember which convention that Thailand did finally sign on to, under opposite, when there was an anti-corruption commission. Oh, yes. Yeah. Anyway, you have to get into the DNA of the Thai culture, and not just in Thailand. Malaysia, Japan, China, Indonesia. So you have to get to the DNA and correct that. And how long is that going to take? I don't know.
In a sense, I'd like to disagree with you. I think that what you call cultural is this practice of what might be termed as paternalism. Being, what should I say, large, having largesse, I think, being, generous and taking care of your staff and your, relatives and your friends and whatnot. But then these sort of things, to me, you can always set standards. Exactly what is overboard, and what that you can always have a fine line, and there is a fine line that you absolutely must not cross. And therefore, to me, where we, I think, are very weakened, would be in recognizing where that line should be. And I think this is exactly where we should work on. Because if you ask the general public, nobody likes corruption.
No.
Everybody says corruption is, one of the worst features of life in Thailand. But they each ask, what can they do about it? And if they were to take such action, would they be protected? Would they be, somehow retaliated, and so on and so on and so on. And this is where we need to organize ourselves, and that is exactly what we're trying to do. Somebody has to start, and it's only a small beginning, but this is part of what at least me and my colleagues are trying to do.
I don't disagree with you at all. And one of the great things that's happening is that's being talked about. It's being published in the newspapers. Take a look at both The Nation and The Post from yesterday. And front page articles were on corruption and which organizations are the most corrupt and so on. Getting it out into the open, getting people to talk about it, is a very great step to solving the problem.
We're down to the last 5 to 10 minutes. Can we just have a couple of questions? Last two. Yes, please. Yeah.
My question is to Mr. Lyman. You talked a little bit about the difference between a compliance officer and a CVO. I'm still not sure about the difference, because when I read this, it seems to me pretty much these are the responsibilities of a compliance officer. So I don't know, maybe can you rephrase what exactly is the difference between the two?
I would say, without defining compliance officer at this point, I would say a compliance officer, if I may come up with a general definition, is one who makes sure the company complies with all the laws. Am I right in your context?
Well, maybe it might be semantics, but in my company, for example, the compliance officer also looks after the values, the compliance of the values and the principles of the company, and the culture of the company. So
okay, so in that particular case, they're synonymous. But normally, a compliance officer, in my view, is narrower, and it would be included. I'm sorry. Regulatory compliance, right? And it would be included in that context. It would be included within my definition of chief CVO. But the one you're talking about, they're synonymous. It's a matter of definition, I think.
Last question? Yeah. Any of our guests in the back? Yeah, you go ahead.
Maybe a couple of advices for the way getting to the top. I mean, we talked a lot about what to do when you are actually a leader, but what do you do when you start your career? I mean, you certainly have more pressure from colleagues and objectives to reach. What do you do to stay? I mean, to.
I think I understand your question.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, don't compromise your values. Do what you know is right. And if it doesn't fit within your organization, then you're in the wrong organization. That's an easy answer, I know. It's difficult to say when jobs are hard to find and all the rest of that. But as soon as you begin to compromise your values, you're in trouble. The characteristics of good leaders require courage. Courage to do the right thing. If you remember, one of the definitions that I mentioned was leaders do things right. I'm sorry, managers do things right, leaders do the right things. Again, easy to say, hard to comply with in the real life situation. But what do you do?
But actually, we did a quick poll in class a couple of weeks ago. I asked if you came to a situation of a major values conflict in your workplace, how many of you would leave? And most of the class actually put up their hand. Right, you remember that? It was a few days ago, so you may have forgotten. But actually, I was actually quite encouraged. Most of the class actually put up their hand.
You need to be expected from a class like this too, actually. Otherwise, we'll be very disappointed.
But it's easy to say in a classroom. In a real life situation, you have to determine what is the right thing to do in that situation. And government leaders, say a president or prime minister, may have a real problem in a real issue. How he has to make, or he or she has to make a decision upon what is morally and ethically correct and what is in the best interest of his country or her country. And if the two coincide, they don't have a problem. But what happens if one is wrong and one is right? What does that leader do? There's no right answer. Okay? Right. But all major leaders can face that issue. A moral issue versus what is in the best interest of the company or in the country or the family or whatever else have you.
You have one issue with the obedience to authority, which if you have time I could come back and we could do a day on this. I have a lot of information on this. What people say they will do, but what people actually do when somebody has told them to do it is totally different. And you can prove this in the one place that you can prove anything in the world, YouTube. And there's an instance of some people in a square, and there's people were walking across, general public was walking across the square, and then somebody would stand there and tell people to do stupid things. Like, they'd say, put your bag into your other hand, and then they would be walking along and move the bag into the other hand. Now, it turns out that if you put that person into a guard's uniform, people are more likely to comply with completely ridiculous requests. I mean, it doesn't matter what hand you carry the bag in. Same in hospitals. Placebo effect on pills with painkillers works 5 times better if the person that tells you to take the pill is wearing a white coat. It's irrelevant whether they're a doctor or anything, so long as they look the part. So obedience to authority means that whatever you think you will do, that's not what you will do. Now, I can come back, we can do a whole day on this. I got lots of stuff, but that's the summary of it.
And could perhaps the same question. So the question was, as you're climbing up, the two position of authority and leadership, what would be, what would be your advice?
So I think you always have to be true to yourself, frankly. And you must know what is right and what is wrong. But, when it's a matter of, I know that there are shades of gray, and that is where, in fact, where you are learning and everything else, you can codify them and eventually, take your side as to where you are. But, I think really, again, I stress on the examples and the duties and the responsibilities and accountability of the leadership, of the leaders, of the tone at the top is the most important. And, as I said, the mechanics of being transparent is very important. What we're hoping that, what would leap us a generation, hopefully we don't have to wait a generation, would be perhaps, catching a big fish. That's our hope, that getting a big fish would help to show everybody that it's just not worth it, and thereby be persuaded, to not be wayward.
Well, there are a couple of big fish swimming outside the boundaries of Thailand at the moment. Another piece of advice, and that is, as you climb up in an organization, have a mentor, someone who's much more senior than you in the organization, but make sure you choose the right mentor.
Yeah. Very last.
Yeah, just a comment about Matthew's question. There is a very effective technique which is called the CNN test. I don't know if you have heard about it. Wherever you are in the hierarchy, whenever you're faced with a dilemma and you don't know what to do, you just apply the CNN test, which is, if what I'm going to do now is presented in CNN, in the news, how would I feel about it? Would I feel proud or would I feel embarrassed? And that will give you a pretty quick answer. What's the ethical thing to do?
That's very, very useful. Oftentimes I find that it's not that the person doesn't know what the right thing to do is. They just choose to go with the flow and not to do it, or for whatever reason. And I think that's probably a larger issue, which I hope through the discussion, both today and over the past several weeks, we provide you many points and techniques to be able to deal with these various situations. We are 5 minutes over time, so I'd like to quickly just 1 minute closing remark from each one of our esteemed panelists, please. Something to for the whole class to take away. Perhaps starting from you, Dan.
One thing to take away then is in the electric universe theory, which I won't explain about, but one thing that they do say is you will never change people's minds. You just have to wait for the people with the old idea to die off. So start with the people who are young. Start with the schools, because cheating in the tests, cheating in exams, handing in assignments that are copied from the internet, and I teach in university here, so I have experience of all of these things. You have to start with the young people. Focus on young people.
You've each been given a copy of a book that I wrote basically for the lawyers in my firm. It was done to bridge the cultural gap between Thai lawyers and the foreigners that they have to represent. It started out as 11 laws, and now it's up to 105, and I'm working on part 2. Anyway, take a look at law number 66, which is consistent with what the last comment was made. And rule number 23. Well, you have to, yes, and this is another one you put under your pillow at night and absorbed by osmosis.
Remarks? Well, I think that my remarks really would be for, I hope that each of you in this room, because you are, I would say, privileged enough, to have had probably the brains, the means, the opportunities. Do please be examples, when and where you can, to uphold, the principles that we've been talking about, and to be also active in combating corruptive practices wherever you can, if you would. Thank you very much.
So please a warm thanks to all of our panelists for sparing their very valuable time to be here with you all. And I hope they've certainly given me many food for thought, and hope that's the same and resonates with you guys too. So thank you very much. we do have a little gift here for all of our panelists. So Alex, perhaps you can help me give these. No bribing. I don't think you can. Value-wise, it's high value, but probably not for a lot of money. So. Thank you very much. For the class, you have your course feedback. Please fill that in before you leave.